Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 213 of the podcast. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. If you're listening to this when it came out, it certainly was different. I don't know about you, but in my state, there were lots of restrictions about gatherings and the numbers. And so it really just changed a lot for families. It definitely changed some things for my family, but I hope you're able to think about the things that you're thankful for in the midst of this crazy year of 2020. And in this episode, I'm excited for you to hear from Adam Weber. We talk about Adam's new book, Love Has a Name. And I just enjoyed my conversation with Adam so much. He's just the real deal. And what he talks about in the book comes from personal experience, personal story. And you're going to get to hear some of that in this interview. We talk about how to love people who are different from you, which the world certainly needs a lot more of that right now, don't we? So you can get all the links and notes at nickblevins.com/episode 213. So let's go ahead and jump into my conversation with Adam all about his book, Love Has a Name, and the story behind it. Well, today I'm talking to Adam Weber. Welcome to the podcast, Adam.
It's a huge honor just to be on with you, and I'm just grateful for the work you're doing, Nick.
I appreciate it. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your church, and we're obviously going to talk about your new book and all that, but just give us an introduction to you.
Yeah, so I am born and raised South Dakotan. So I've lived here my entire life with the exception of 3 years when we lived in Kentucky for my master's. Born and raised in the northeast part of the state, grew up Lutheran, all my extended family's Catholic. Some of my earliest memories as a kid was me strongly disliking church, borderline hating church. Well, I came to Christ somehow, some way. My sophomore year of high school was a radical transformation for me. Went to business school at a school called Augustana in Sioux Falls. I always thought I'd do ministry through a business of some kind, and just I've always loved marketing and branding and that kind of thing. So went to Augie. My summer before my senior year of college, I ended up, again, through the craziest circumstances, filled in for a pastor up in North Dakota. Within the first week, I knew I was supposed to be a pastor. Came back, finished my last year of business school, got married to the daughter of the pastor I filled in for in North Dakota. The next day we moved to Kentucky. I got my master's, had no intention of coming back to South Dakota. God had other plans. Ended up starting a church called Embrace. We're now multi-site church. We have networks as well, churches that are independent of us that use our message. I'm still the most inadequate, unlikely of people to be a pastor, but it's been a fun journey. I started the church when I was 24 years old. Now I'm 38. I have 4 kids. We can never have a 5th child. Otherwise I will, I don't know what I'll do. I'll just need Jesus, I guess, a whole bunch. But I've been married to my wife, Becky, for 16 years. We got a couple of dogs, some chickens, some fish. I like old cars, typewriters, anything old. I'm a nerd. And so that's kind of the high points of who I am.
Well, so you're a couple of years younger than me, and so it means your church, because our church was planted 14 years ago. So they were planted about the same time, which is kind of cool. And
yeah,
man, I don't know about you, but the way I always say it is, it's gone by really fast, and it's also gone by really, in a sense, like it feels like forever, since the beginning. So like both things are true at the same time. I feel like I remember the launch day like yesterday, but then there are other times it's like, man, it definitely has been 14 years.
That says it so incredibly well. And for me, it's felt like I've pastored several churches, even though it's the same church, like different sizes, different seasons. It's really crazy to look back and realize all the things that have changed and grown and whatever else over the years too.
Yeah, and I'd say, I'm not the lead pastor of our church. I think that carries a whole different weight. And the way you just said it, like you've pastored several churches, that could be a whole separate podcast conversation, because I think in some ways that is what's needed with a church to grow. It can't be the same church at 200 as it is at 5 or 1,000.
Yes.
Or plus. And so that's good. That means you've grown through different barriers and different seasons and things that, we all know in church world tend to be like ceilings, barriers to growth. So that's great. What did, I want to talk, before we jump in and talk about the book, I feel like every conversation I have with a church leader, I want to talk about what's going on now. What are you doing? What's the ministry look like in this season, in person, online, that whole deal. But before, COVID-19 shut down in-person services, what did Embrace Church look like in terms of average attendance, number of campuses, and things like that?
So we have 4 campuses. We have, I think, currently 7 network churches, a few thousand people each weekend. And we were in the midst of another growth curve like nobody's business, which is the hardest part for me, honestly. Just that sounds really selfish, but just seeing God move and transform lives in a way that we hadn't probably seen in 3 years. We went through a hard season a couple of years ago, and we're really in a time of you could just feel the momentum. We had already purchased a piece of land, and we were going to build a new campus for one of our campuses. We were going to do an addition to the broadcast campus, and all those things got pushed on hold. We had just started a thing kids ministry wise called Embrace Academy, which is probably, and I can't take any credit for it, so not bragging on myself at all. It's just a different way of doing kids ministry that we've found a lot of success in. So we had just launched that. We had also started a thing called the Run Project, where anybody who is even loosely connected with Embrace can apply for $2,000 to go do awesome God things out in the community. And so we had just launched those 2 things. And so it was a really, really strong season right before COVID. So that's kind of where that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of kids ministry people are listening, and so they're going to want to hear about Embrace Academy. So I think we're going to have to set up a separate call with somebody who does know that absolutely. Well. I'd love to ask them. I know I'm sure things are different now, but I'd love to ask all about that and hear that too. So tell us a little bit about, I don't want to spend too much time here because obviously we want to talk more about your book and how that applies to family ministry leaders and people listening and to really all Christians. What did it, what are some, takeaways, changes you made, learnings, bumps and bruises that you experienced relaunching in-person gatherings? I think you said May, June, going online, now doing both, I imagine, probably in a different way than you did, a year ago. So what are some things that you've learned there?
Yeah, we've learned a ton, and we still have a ton to learn. Size-wise, so we've had services since June. We're the only state in the country that didn't get fully shut down because of COVID. So we've had physical services for a while. We're still at 55% of where we were a year ago. And again, that's kind of right before we really began to see this momentum come. So I think it's even exaggerated more. But really, I think this to talk kids ministry, we'd always talked about doing our own kids curriculum and wanting to do something that was more personalized. There's so many great curriculums out there, but we really wanted to try something. And this forced us to do that because we now had this kids team of as far as staff people, I believe 8 to 10 kids people. And so it's what are we going to have them do? One of the most exciting things for me as a lead pastor is to see our team discover talents in themselves that we never knew and they never knew existed. Our kids team and what we do kids curriculum wise, it's via video. It's the best that I've seen, and we don't have this huge crew of production people. So it's really powerful to see what a team of people can do. And we've decided that we're going to continue doing that even long term. Even though this last Sunday we relaunched Embrace Academy, we're to continue doing that, utilizing it on Sundays in addition to Embrace Academies. And also it's something we can offer network churches. So churches that are utilizing our Sunday message now have video content for their kids area. And we're doing the same in youth as well. We're trying to do everything both in person and online, which has made things really, really complicated. And it's spread our video people thin more than even our kids people, I think. But it's been so cool to see our kids people really take ownership and just run with something.
Do you think, I have 2 questions I think I'm coming out of there. One of the challenges that every church is facing is doing in-person and online now to new levels, right? In-person, different. In some ways, probably doesn't feel like it is at the same level it was before, but it's in some ways more work because there's a lot that's new and different. Now, online, it's probably better. But then there was a time where it was you're only doing in-person and online looked like whatever. Then you're online only, and that got ramped up and improved. but then in person's back. And now it's like, well, wait a minute, how do I do these two things at the same time that take more work? And that's true church wide. And I've seen a lot of churches, even our church has had like staffing structure conversations and moves to help facilitate that. But I don't know that that's always translated to kids and student ministry. So a lot of the people I see, they're not getting extra staff help in the kids world or the student world. They're trying to figure out the same thing. How do I do in-person attendance with 30 or 50% of what we usually get, but keep online at the same level? How have you all navigated that? And as a team, have you scaled back anything online to make in-person work?
That's a great question. There was different things that we started. We did like an online large group, and we did like a daily worship time and this kind of stuff. And those things, we just weren't seeing the listenership. And so we dropped them. Sure. And we dropped them in 3 weeks. I mean, we tried it. It wasn't working. And so we're like, hey, let's not keep doing this. The hardest part for me is we really lean into online for the first time ever. It's been there, but it's always kind of been back burner. And it's like, yep, it's there. We've had it for years. But we got our online quality so solid through COVID. Even just worship wise, the worship team was all full-time worship staff people because we only had one campus instead of 4. Yeah. And so our team was dynamite. It's like, and they're dynamite, not even because they have better talent, because their full-time job is to make that solid.
Yeah.
And so it was hard to see that level, not just worship, but every level drop again when we went back to physical campuses.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we've really pushed is like, let's get online back up. Like that has to go back up. It has to be high quality still. And so that's been one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a challenge every church faces. And I hope most of them won't just say, all right, back to in-person, online can stink again. I hope they take your perspective and still want to make that really good, because so many people are going to engage there, even years down the road, not just now when a good percentage still aren't attending in person, but even years down the road. Well, I appreciate you talking about that. I love hearing about it from a lead pastor's perspective too. We've had a lot of kids leaders and student leaders kind of give us an update about where their church is in the process of meeting in person and what's that been like, and have they got enough volunteers, that kind of thing. Last question about it. Did you get enough, like you've been going in person for a while now, have the volunteers returned at a rate that kept up with the attendance? You know what I mean? Like you got enough of them back that you can do what you were going to do?
Yeah. So we just relaunched our full Embrace Academy that we do this last Sunday, and we've had physical services since the end of May or start of June. In mid-August is when we launched some form of kids ministry at every service. Mm-hmm. And why it's taken us a month and a half to get back to full what we're offering is single-handedly because of volunteers.
Yeah.
I mean, early on, we had 10% of our volunteers say they were coming back. The other 90% said they weren't.
Wow.
I mean, so that's intense numbers. I do think it was magnified because of South Dakota summers. Our summer here is like holy, because it only lasts for a certain length.
Yeah.
We can't brag about much in South Dakota except cold weather. I mean, even places like Chicago, in contrast to South Dakota, don't really have winters.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's like, it's holy. So I do think that was magnified a bit, but I mean, it was incredibly challenging. We virtually had to start over with our kids volunteers.
Do you know where you got to now? Like in terms of, not even now, but like when you launched this 6 weeks ago, I'm guessing you had more than 10%.
Yes, I think we're at 50% of what we were a year ago, volunteer-wise.
Gotcha. Which I hear that number a lot. I hear less than that too. I know a friend who's launching here soon, and so far they only have 20% with kids volunteers. Somebody else I know has 30, 35, something like that. 50 is a common number I hear, but a lot of churches that start, they're only getting 20 or 30%, and so 50% volunteers works out. Like you got more.
That's right. That's right.
Like you're past that now, so that's different. Well, we probably talk longer than I hope to about that, but I just love hearing like what's going on now and just learning from what churches are doing, and certainly a different perspective from a lead pastor seat. But really what we want to talk about is your new book, Love Has a Name. So tell us kind of the what is the book and what's the heart and the story behind you writing the book?
Yeah, so the book, just to be kind of candid and honest, it came out of really the first season of my life that I didn't want to love anybody. For most of my life, my strong suits have been the gift of gab and just a genuine love of people. And a couple of years ago, I think it was a combination of burnout. And then I had to make a really hard decision leadership wise that wasn't a popular decision. I drugged my feet for 6 months in making the decision. And I knew it wouldn't be popular. I didn't know how hard it would be. And it was devastating to me. And so I began to write this book out of a time that I want to love. I want to love my family, a few close friends, and that's about it. And I think anybody listening, when you get hurt, specifically when you get hurt by Christians, it hurts worse even. And so I'm so glad that Jesus doesn't let us stay there. He wants us to process our feelings and to deal with our pain and our wounds, but he doesn't want us to stay in bitterness. And that's where I wanted to stay. But Jesus really for the first time in my life, Jesus is like, we can't stay here, and I need to teach you what it looks like to love people when you don't want to love people. And so I just began this journey of really relearning how to love. And in this time, I began to think about all the different people who have loved me. Because when you're in a season of pain or hurt or bitterness, you can easily focus on the people who have wronged you. Even right now, I'm guessing if I just said, tell me the 5 people who have hurt you the most, you could list them immediately because you've had a boxing match with them in your head on a regular basis. You've maybe even swore at them in your car, even though they weren't there, but you were having an imaginary conversation with them. Like, we can so easily focus on the people who have wronged us, but we rarely focus on all the people who have loved us. And so I just began to think about all the people throughout my life who had shown me what love really is. And so this book is each chapter is the name of a person. It's 27 different people who have either loved me or I've tried to love them, connected to someone similar that Jesus has loved. And so, like the second chapter is a chapter called Jake. Jake was my best friend in elementary school. Jake isn't to this day, he's not a Christian, and yet even him was able to show me a specific aspect of what the love of Jesus looks like. And so it was so cool to think about all these people who had loved me so well. None of them have platforms. None of them have big churches. None of them are pastors, actually. I mean, they're all everyday types of people who have shown the love of Jesus. And my hope is through a combination of my just honesty and Lord willing, genuineness, along with my combination of cheesiness, that it would really kind of speak to and minister to the person who's struggling to love people in their lives.
Yeah, which I think all of us do. I have to ask, and if you don't want to go there, you don't have to, but when you talked about a hard leadership decision that, people didn't agree with, I feel like, man, in the season we're in, it's a bunch of those, because there's people all over the map for church leaders. And I just wonder if you'd be willing to share any else from that would be helpful for leaders listening who probably feel like, yeah, I have to make one of those in 3 weeks,
Oh, it's painful. I had to let a staff person go. And it was so painful. I mean, it was so painful, even for me to make the decision, yet I knew it was the right decision. It's so crazy to me because now I'm standing in one of the most wonderful seasons of my life. So I want to encourage that person who's maybe in that dark season right now. I never thought a season so good could follow a season so bad. And it was so I wrote the book out of a season of pain, and it released during a season where it feels like our world is at where I was 2 years ago. I mean, our world is kind of like, hey, I want to love my few close friends, my family, and if you disagree with me, then you can just mind your own business. If you disagree or if you hurt me, I block you, I cancel you, I disown you. I just if you vote differently than I do, I really don't even want to associate with you anymore.
Which is common now. That is the thing. In fact, we just had a conversation like this with our leadership team recently that we got to challenge the idea that if we disagree or if I feel a little bit different than the church or other people in the church, then my instinct is to run. That's not good. That's not good. But that seems to be the thing now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the opposite of the way of Jesus. Jesus hung out with people and sought out people that mostly disagreed with him. And he struggled with people that if you did an exam, he'd probably agree with the most, Pharisees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet the Pharisees struggled with him, and the people who were very different from him were drawn to him. And so it's like, what does that mean for us as followers of Jesus? Even today, there was a family that I'm close with that struggled with a topic we covered, and they struggled big time. And then we sat down for coffee this morning, and all I could think was, this is what the world is missing, is an actual conversation. Because it would have been so easy. They sent me a text message that wasn't very kind, not at me, was at the topic. And most of the world would be like, well, fine then, we're done. Even though we've known each other and had a friendship for 4 years, it's like, cancel, over. We think differently than me. And we had the most life-giving conversation this morning. I just, right before coming on this podcast, got a text message from the wife. And she thank you for our time this morning. Love the conversation and appreciate that we were able to share that time with you. Have a wonderful week. Oh, all that I would miss out on this morning and for years to come if I would have just shut down the conversation. And it's like, that's what we're doing right now. Instead of, as followers of Jesus, we should seek out conversation. Seek out understanding people, seek out humility and being willing to say, I'm learning, I'm on the journey, I don't understand, help me to understand. We should be the best at that. And yet oftentimes Christians are no different. Christians, we're canceling stuff left and right. Like, no, like we disagree on this one non-essential things. We can't worship together. Oh, you believe in predestination? Well, I'm free will. We're done. Like, oh, you baptize infants? I dedicate? You're unbiblical and wrong. Who's right? Oh, you're both wrong. Like, that's just us. Instead of like, what do we have in common? Jesus. And there's a few very essential things that are critical to what it means to follow Jesus. But there's a whole lot of things I'm just a work in progress on. And I think if we just took that approach, I think it would change a lot of things. We as the world, we as the church, we love to criticize the world, but sadly, oftentimes we look like the world instead of like, no, I can. This is really, really messy, but I'm willing to enter into the mess.
Yeah. Well, you tell a story about cookies, and maybe I want you to tell it just because I'm hungry and I'm thinking about is cookies now. Or maybe there's a bigger point to the story. So either way, go ahead and tell us that.
Yeah, one of my chapters, I talk about the fact that love makes every day an adventure. And a couple of years ago, one of the things I began to pray is every single day, Lord, would you help me to cross paths with one person that I can show the love of Jesus to? Just one person. Like, would you just help me to show the love of Jesus to? So about a year and a half ago, one morning, it was my weekend. It was either a Friday or Saturday. I started feeling like this feeling of, you need to go make chocolate chip cookies. And mind you, I just had a busy week, pastor a large church. I write books, like I got a master's degree. I think all of us would fill in the blank if we were being really honest with ourselves, like these different things that supposedly make us somebody. And so I started feeling like, go make chocolate chip cookies. I'm like, that's a terrible idea. I'm not doing that. It's my weekend. I'm going to sit still. Go make chocolate chip cookies. I don't want to. Go make chocolate chip cookies. That's the craziest thing. Finally, I'm like, okay, I'll make chocolate chip cookies. A quick side note, I'm not good at making anything except chocolate chip cookies. Like they're fantastic. Yeah. And so I asked my daughter, Grayson, she's a fourth grader. I'm like, baby, she's a second grader at this time. I'm like, would you want to make chocolate chip cookies? I knew she'd want to. She says, yes. So we make the chocolate chip cookies. At the end, she's like, what are we going to do with them? I'm like, baby, would you mind making a sign that says free cookies? And just because I just felt like we were supposed to make cookies and then give them out on the street corner. So she runs upstairs, comes down with this piece of paper that's bedazzled, free chocolate chip cookies. We go to the street corner. The whole time I'm grumbling and mumbling. I'm like, this is a waste of my time away from my time with my daughter. This is foolish. I shouldn't be doing this. It's me time, like all this kind of thing. I sit down, we sit down on the street corner right in front of my house. And we live in a neighborhood that's fairly diverse in every way. And so I just had no idea who was going to come. We sit down, immediately people start getting chocolate chip cookies from us. There's all these families, low income, high income, different colors of people. I mean, just everything. There's a man that comes, gets cookies, families that are coming. There's this one family, this one girl and her dad, a little native girl that comes, gets cookies. I mean, just all kinds of people can get cookies. Whole time I'm like, this is such a waste. This is such a waste. 45 minutes later, all the cookies are gone. And I'm like, okay, God, made cookies. Thanks. Check that box. Okay, now can I go back to relaxing again? Because that was a waste. 6 months later, some friends and I, we went to the local food pantry and we brought 2 photographer friends. And then we asked some Facebook friends of ours if they would donate 8x10 picture frames. So we show up, we got all these picture frames, like 200 picture frames, these photographers. We start offering people to get a free 8x10 family photo taken of them. They can go eat their meal. And then when they come out, they'll get an 8x10 frame picture of themselves. So we're doing this. It's awesome. Anybody who wants to have a fun time, go do this. You'll have the most amazing 2 hours of your life. Well, halfway through, there's this man that comes up and he seems angry and he walks up to me and in a fairly loud voice, he says, "You." And I'm like, he's like, "You." And he's pointing at me and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's angry. He's like, "Were you at a street corner with a little girl giving out cookies?" And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the one human on the planet who hates my cookies. Or maybe like, did I give him food poisoning? I'm like, how? What is wrong with his taste buds that he doesn't love the awesomeness that I baked? And I was like, yeah, it was me. And he said, "This man is amazing." And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not amazing, not amazing. He's like, "Amazing." And I'm like, no, I'm really not amazing. He's like, and then he said, "That day, I had just lost my job. I was starving. I was walking home and I saw you guys giving out cookies and I knew I didn't have any money. And so I switched to the other side of the sidewalk. And then your daughter yelled out free cookies." And he said, "I came over." He's like, "First off, best darn cookie I've ever had." And he said, "Secondly, that day, more than any day in my life, I needed to be reminded that God still loved me." And he's like, I don't know what it was, but just that small act just ministered to me. And he's like, "Thank you. Can we hug?" And we hugged. So all the volunteers, he goes inside. Well, my friends were just like, "That's amazing." And I'm like, oh, that was definitely God, because I didn't want to make cookies. And we wrap up and I'm just like, okay, that's why I made cookies, was for that guy. Well, the very first Sunday we had services after COVID, a family came in to the church I pastor, and they're a couple, husband and wife, who have wanted to have kids that couldn't have kids. They just got approved for fostering, and they came in with 3 kids. They're foster kids for the very first time. So they came to the service. After the service, the young one, he's like 5 years old. He comes up because the family comes up to say hello afterwards. And the 5-year-old says, "I know you." And I'm like, no, I'm thinking to myself, he doesn't know who I am. I'm like, oh, and he's like, "I know you." I'm like, oh, that's cute. Like, I'm thinking to myself, you don't know who I am. And he's like, "And I know where you live." And I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird to say that you would know where I live and you're 5 years old. And then the daughter, the older sister, again, this foster girl, the older sister, she said, "And one day, my dad and I, we stopped by your house and we got cookies." And as soon as she said that, I immediately recognized her. She was the young native girl that had stopped with her dad. And that day, I don't know why, but it just seemed like she was going through something. And then when she left, I prayed for her. And so she said that. I knelt down by her and I said, "I remember you. That day I prayed for you." And she said, "What?" I said, "It just seemed like you were going through something. and yet you were so beautiful. I just wanted you to know that God loves you, and so I prayed for you." And she said, "My dad always loves walking by your house. Sometimes he'll actually change where we're going so that he can walk by your house." They left that day. The two foster parents reached out to me and said on Facebook, they're like, "I can't believe that." And I said, "I can't believe that." And what struck me, they said, the kids talked about you all the way home. And all that challenged me the rest of the day was the thought, and to think the whole time I grumbled and mumbled about making cookies. I just couldn't get over it. I'm like, to think I almost missed the opportunity. And lately what God's been challenging me is, he's been saying, "Hey, Adam, the things that you think are really big, like pastoring a mega church and your book deals that are kind of cute and all this kind of things, like the things that you think are really big are actually really, really small. And Adam, can I say another thing to you?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, Jesus. Yeah, like those big things, that kind of hurt that you said those big things were actually small things. But I got another thing for you, Adam. Like, you're so smart and intelligent, and you just know the Bible really well and all this kind of stuff. And church attendance is perfect because you're a pastor. Like, I actually got another thing for you. And the things that you think are really, really small, yeah, God, like they're actually really, really, really big. You know, those things that you think are small and they're such a nuisance to you because you're so important. Like those big things, like making chocolate chip cookies for an hour with your daughter and then giving them out in the street corner so I can remind this man that he's seen by me, and this little girl that she's loved by me. Those are the things that I want you to do more of, Mr. Hotshot Pastor, book deal person. And I feel like for me, it's like, do more of those things because those are actually the big things. And for me, that's just been one of the biggest challenges of my life. And the same is true with like people. Like lately, God's been like, you know the names of a lot of people that everybody wants to know the names of. Like today in your episode, you released a conversation between you and a former NFL player. Who doesn't want to know the name of a former NFL player who's a 2-time Super Bowl champ? Oh, that's great. And I care about him. Chris is a wonderful man. But hey, Adam, how about you start to focus on the names of the people that nobody knows? Because I got this weird thing that I've often said. Again, this is God talking. The least will be the greatest, and the greatest will be the least. And so you're focused on a lot of the people who are actually the least, and you're missing out on these people who are the greatest. And I just even think about a lot of the listeners are kids ministry people. We might know the name of the kid in our class or in our children's ministry that, their parents are doctors and they're kind of good people. Like just everybody they're really likable. And those are so important because sometimes the doctor's kids and the pastor's kids are the ones that are hurting the most. But in the same breath, what about the kid who's got autism? And what about the kid who's just got behavioral issues? And what about the kid who kind of stinks, like physically, like they kind of make you, like physically they stink? Are you getting to know the names of those kids? Because this is really hard in your little world again, Adam, but like they're actually the greatest. And they're actually the kids that I'm most interested in. And that's not a contrast to the pastor's kids or the doctor's kids, because they matter as well, absolutely. But it's like, those are the kids that you might want to start to get to know the names of. And I think for me, that's been one of the challenges of the last 2 years is the things that I make really important are really not important at all. And then the things that I think are a nuisance to me are actually the things that God is most interested in. I look at Jesus and his interruptions. I mean, the 2 blind men who won't, just to be frank, won't shut up, like the crowd tells them to shut up. Instead of Jesus being like, yeah, 2 blind people, please shut up. The crowd told you to do that. He's like, nope, we're going to stop right here. And I'm going to go, hey, what do you guys want? We want to see. Oh, okay. Well, then you're healed. See. And I just think in those moments, I'm like, do I just join in with the crowd and be like, yeah, can you guys be quiet? He's headed to Jerusalem. He's a pretty big deal. He's going to get on a donkey and there's going to be palm branches. And I just think interruptions are interruptions to me. It's like, oh, I got an agenda. I got important things. And Jesus is like, you're actually missing my agenda for you, which is a lot more important. And it's also a lot more life-giving and filled with the fruit of the Spirit and peace and joy. I'm not sure if you're looking for those things, but it's got a lot of that kind of stuff. And that's what I want to lean into more.
I feel like, I don't know if you would say this, and you experienced that before COVID hit, so you probably had more time between like that kind of story and that kind of revelation from God about these small things and these moments. So maybe I'm guessing there were other times that you were able to lean in and maybe pay attention more to those moments that God could be leading you to. I feel like in some ways, on one hand, COVID has made everybody more selfish is a harsh way to say it, but there's more in pain, it's more stressed, less time. So in that way, you're looking in more. But I would also say in our church, one of the things we focused on for sure was connecting with people. And so, and even from a pastor of a church to anybody else in staff, in some ways I felt like there was more in-depth personal relationship and conversations happening than ever before, because there was room and space for it there, especially in the early months. Would you say that was true for you and even your team too, or has COVID and all of that stress that it's brought made it actually harder to look for those small moments and opportunities and where God's leading?
That's a great question. I think for me personally, it made it easier to have those moments because it's almost like working out. I think when you really begin to work out at first, it's painful, but you after a while, you see the benefits and you're like, I want more of that. And so for me, over the last 2 years, anytime that I've been restless or really feel self-focused, I've just intentionally tried to focus on others. And every time I've done so, my life is filled genuinely with the fruit of the Spirit, just love and joy and peace. Because in those moments when we focus on others and we try to love people unconditionally, our heart is most closest to the heart of God. And so really now that, our kids went back to school 2 weeks ago, it's actually been harder for me to keep that space in my life and schedule. Mm-hmm. And I've really kind of been searching for it, honestly, and trying to develop rhythms to have it back in there, even when my schedule feels more normal than it's felt since March. And so, because I don't want that to disappear. I mean, that's been genuinely away from my family and friendships. It's been the most life-giving thing that I've done this last 2 years. It's just been, it's led to the most bizarre people ever, and doing things that I'm like, what am I doing right now? Like, who am I praying with in my back alley when it's dark and I have no idea who this person is? It's led to such a wonderful adventure that I wouldn't trade for anything.
And people have to read the book to get more of those stories, because unfortunately we don't have any more time to talk through some of that and all that. But tell people how to get a copy of the book, how to connect with you if they have any questions or just want to follow on social and everything like that.
Yeah, you can find the book pretty much anywhere books are sold. Again, it's just called Love Has a Name. You can search for it on Amazon, on Target.com, Walmart.com, Barnes & Noble, just anywhere books are sold. I'd be so grateful to cross paths with you. You can find me on Instagram at Adam A. Weber or Twitter at Adam Weber. And those are definitely the two places that I'm most active. And if you read the book, I'd love to, if there's anything I missed or anything that's challenged you, I'd be so honored to hear from you. And I'd even be honored to hear about the people in your life that have shown you who and what love is.
And people can listen to the Conversation podcast, right, to hear some of those conversations like the ones you mentioned with the former NFL player and things like that too. So I'm sure they can get to that through your website as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. You can find all the links and everything at adamweber.com. And yeah, the podcast has been an absolute joy, kind of interviewing the spectrum of people that are, in quotes, famous, and then kind of everyday people as well. So it's been a lot of fun doing that. Cool.
Well, Adam, thanks for writing this book, the journey that God has taken you on, that the book has come from and what that's meant in your life, and I'm sure in your family and your church and people you influence. And thanks for taking time to come on the podcast to share about that, as well as, what churches look like for Embrace Church in the last 6 months or whatever through these different seasons. We appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, Nick, again, just a huge blessing to you. I'm honored to be with you and truly give thanks for the ways that God is speaking in and through you.
Well, I told you Adam was the real deal. I think you definitely got a sense for that listening to that conversation. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. A few of the action items I thought of coming out of there, of course, one is to get the book, read the book, and then another action step is find one person who is different. Who can we love? We're talking about this in my small group. We're doing the Rooted study. Many of you have heard of that from Mariners Church. It's a great study. And part of that, they challenge you throughout doing that study to think of 3 people that you can talk to about Jesus. And when Adam was talking about this, I thought of that, and just to focus on someone who is different from us. I mean, you heard from his stories. Just imagine the different things that can happen. The third action item is to listen to and subscribe to his podcast, The Conversation with Adam Weber. There's lots of great guests on there, and there's been more, since we recorded this interview that you would love to listen to. Well, that's it for this week, for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you subscribe so you don't ever miss an episode. It's been a long time since I've pushed or asked people really to rate and review the podcast. So if you would be willing to do that, I would really appreciate that. Maybe you'll consider it an early Christmas gift for me or something like that. I imagine I don't actually even keep track of this very much. I don't watch the statistics much. I'm not really good at that, but I know how important that is for getting this in front of other people. And I just know the things that we talk about here will be helpful to ministry leaders. And so if you could rate and review, that'd be great. My guess is I haven't had many ratings and reviews in a long time. I don't talk about it much. And so I'm guessing it hasn't moved anywhere, but maybe this month, as we head into Christmas, we can get some fresh reviews and ratings on there, and some other people will find this. And I mean, just think about this episode, how helpful that would be for people to hear that. So make sure you subscribe too, so you don't miss anything. There's some episodes I've been hanging on to for a while that we recorded pre-pandemic, but they're still really, really good. And we're going to get those out here soon now, as well as at the turn of the year. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.